Hi everyone. Hola, bienvenidos. My name is Miss B. I am a visiting artist and I will be teaching a workshop for your classes. If you are watching this video, it is probably because you missed a class today, so you are here to make it up, or it could be because you didn't have the materials on hand earlier and you're here now to work on your clay sculpture, or because you didn't have the materials at all and you need a modified version of the assignment in order to meet back with us on Wednesday and to share your work. So before we get to any of that, right, I'm going to talk about all of the materials in the kit. There's a bunch of different kits. Each kit kind of can have different things. It doesn't matter if you're missing something. We're going to use whatever is in our kit. Everything serves our purposes. If you do not have the materials, I will talk to you about the modified version of the assignment shortly. Before we get to any of that though, it is important that we do the introduction, right? So we're here today to basically make a figurine, a sculpture, a physical version of a feeling. So in order to do that, we first have to pick a feeling. So I want everyone to close their eyes. Close them real tight, no peeking. No peeking. So we're just going to close them and we're going to think of a feeling. Now, this feeling could be a feeling you feel. Maybe it's a feeling that you have felt in the past, maybe in the past recently, like this weekend, or maybe a longer time ago. It could be a feeling that you've seen someone else have a lot of. Or it could be a feeling that you've seen in the movies, or a feeling that you're curious about, right? So I want you to think about this feeling. Think about if you've ever felt this feeling, how to make you feel. Think about the person who was showing that feeling. How did they look? How did they feel to you? Okay, so I don't want you to tell me. You can open your eyes now. Keep that feeling in your mind, right? Because what we're going to do is we're going to create something based on that feeling. We're going to answer the question, what if the feeling that you chose had a body, right? What if it existed physically in this world? And that's what we're going to try to figure out. So first, I'm going to reach out to everyone who does not have the materials and will not get the materials. If you are eventually going to get the materials, I really recommend just skipping ahead. If you don't have any of the materials from the clay kit, don't worry about it. We are still going to do really great work together and you are still going to have a good time. If you can, I would like for you to find something to write with, draw with. It can be a pen, a pencil, a marker, it doesn't matter. And something to draw on. I prefer paper that is completely blank. That way we can really put our feelings or our emotions or our images onto that paper. Sometimes it can be a little distracting working on lined paper. And I like blank paper because I feel like it really helps your work pop. And I want to see everyone's work. So once you have those two materials, come back to your surface and think about the feeling that you have chosen. I don't want to know the feeling yet because on Wednesday or the next day that we see each other, we're going to try to figure out each of the feelings that we represented. So I'm going to tell you my feeling today only so that I can show you how I'm going to make it into a feeling monster or like a feeling creature or a physical being that is this feeling. So I think I'm going to go with sad today. And I'm thinking that if I start with a basic shape, maybe a circle, and I think about how a sad circle would look, I kind of imagine a circle deflating, kind of like a ball when it doesn't have a lot of air in it. It just kind of gets smaller and squished. So I'm going to start with that shape. It's a really good idea to try to make your first shape as big as possible. Let's not be afraid of the page. Let's take up the page. So I'm going to draw my little sad circle, slightly deflated. All right, I'm going to end that line, completely seal it. I don't know if you can see that right here. So you see my shape, it's a little squished, right? So it's not completely expanded. This is not a very confident shape. It's a little bleh, a little like sad blob. So I'm going to continue that. And I'm going to keep adding blobs to my blob, right? Until it starts to look like some sort of creature, some sort of figure. Let's see. This is why it's important to start off your first shape as big as possible, because it gives you more space to play with inside of the creature or thing that you are drawing. And as you're drawing and you're making all of the shapes, I want you to think about that feeling that you chose. Think about that feeling kind of like leaving you and entering this creature, right? Like this creature is not going to carry this feeling. It belongs to them, so we're going to give it to them. I'm going to add another little blob here. Maybe a little sideways. Give it a little character. So this is what it's looking like so far. I'm getting sad puppy vibes. I don't know. A little bleh blob. That's what I'm feeling that. And so don't be afraid to keep adding onto your shape. Try not to get stuck. Like if you started with a little rectangle, don't let that rectangle kind of box you in. Don't let it be the end of how you allow this emotion or this feeling to take shape. So as you can see, I had started with a really sad circle, and now I'm kind of adding these little bottom tentacle parts. Kind of like it's melting. Try to be loose with it. Try to think of what's a different way to represent eyes if that's something that you want to put. How would you represent that? You can use different shapes. Here we go. This is where I'm at so far. It's looking a lot like a face. I'm going to try to make it a little weirder. And once you maybe have figured out some of the basic shapes that you like for it, and you are like, this guy's looking good, this character is really communicating the feeling that I want to give off, I want you to start thinking about adding some sort of texture or some sort of dimension to this being. Is it furry? Is it slimy? Is it scaly? What do you think? Is it covered in dirt, or maybe something different? Something weird. Maybe it's a yarn monster. I don't know. So let's try to illustrate that as best as we can. There's no rush. And I just advise everyone to take their time. You can kind of follow along with the pace of this video if you'd like. You can go a little bit faster, you can go a little slower, whatever you want to do. And I think the most important part about this is not trying to rush to finish, right? We really have to allow this drawing to tell us who it wants to be, right? Like, we know it's a feeling, but now we have to allow it to reveal itself to us. So like, once you think you're done, keep going. Add something else, right? Once you figure out what kind of creature you have going on, what figure monster, maybe you just have a bunch of shapes together and you don't think that they look quite like a being or like a standalone thing, but they're still representing the emotion, right? You can add some kind of shading, maybe darken up the things, add some lines, whatever. You can, at this point, grab color if you would like to, start expanding your drawing. But one thing is, you see all this white space? I got all this white space up here, and I got all this white space down here. I need to take up that whole space, okay? I need to cover this paper. I'm thinking about my creature, my character, and I'm thinking, who does this person hang out with, right? If this one is feeling sad, what would it look like if it had a friend that was the opposite of sad, maybe very happy? So maybe I should add a happier friend here. You can add a bunch of other friends if there's other emotions that you also want to discover and think of how they would look like if you imagine them as real creatures or real beings. It's completely up to you. I'm going to continue working on this a little bit later. I really hope that you guys have a good time working on it. I can't wait to see what you guys drew up, and I'm going to have such a great time trying to guess what feeling you were trying to communicate. So if you are someone who missed the class or just got your clay materials, you should have this for this part of the video. So this is a clay kit. I have a clay kit that has every single kind of tool I've included in all of the kits. Every kit is a little bit different. No one kit is the same. Some people might have different kind of tools. I will explain what we're going to use every single tool for. Earlier in the video, I asked everyone to pick an emotion, to pick a feeling that they were going to use to inspire their creation. So keep that in mind as we work through this. So first I want to kind of bring out everything and briefly explain what everything is. I'm going to start with these utensils. So you either have this kind of popsicle stick, it's a big craft stick. You have this kind of spoon-like stick. You have a toothpick. Or you have this kind of little flat, pointy, spear-shaped wooden object. And you might also have this kind of fishing line. And I will explain what all of these things are. So, some of you may have gotten 2 popsicle sticks. What that means is that you can either use one popsicle stick to smooth out the clay that we're going to use. So this is going to be a smoothing tool. That's what this is for as well. Both of these smoothing tools. If you are someone who has an extra popsicle stick, you have the option of deciding if you want to use this popsicle stick as the base of your creature's skeleton. And we'll explain that in a second. These kind of tools right here, the toothpick and this finer one, these are for carving or for small detail work. If you have a bunch of extra toothpicks in your house and you want to use them to create a more interesting shape in your sculpture, maybe you want to add spikes, I don't know, give it a little horn, you can go ahead and grab some more toothpicks if you have them available to you. So carving. Finally, this fishing line, you might have a little bit, not everyone has some. If you have some, all this is for is just to cut the clay a little bit easier than using your fingers. I was not able to include them in all of the kits, unfortunately, so this is just if you have it. Otherwise, I'm going to walk you through on how to soften the clay. So, speaking of the clay, let's get to that. This is Sculpey, original Sculpey to be exact. It helps to know that name in case you need to look it up and see what are the baking instructions. It should be wrapped in saran wrap. So what we can do right now, you can take off that saran wrap if you'd like. I usually just put it to the side, get it in the trash. This clay is really nice because it doesn't dry out. It can get really stiff, really hard if you haven't worked it for a really long time, but it doesn't harden until you bake it. I will explain how to bake this clay at the end of this video, so stay tuned for that. You will need an adult to help you do this, and you will need access to either a regular oven or a toaster oven, a convection oven. So my clay is pretty soft. I had pre-worked it before this, but a lot of you might find that your clay is not soft at all. It can feel like a rock. You're thinking, how am I going to break this apart? So if you have fishing line, what you can do is you grab the fishing line, maybe you can ask an adult to help you if someone's around, and you just kind of push through and you saw it a little bit. And what that does is that helps you break it. a lot easier. The reason why I sliced through it is because when you have a big lump of clay that hasn't been softened and is really hard, trying to work it all as a lump is just not going to work out. It's going to be so hard, you're going to be so tired, and there's just a better way to do it. So if you don't have a fishing line to help break it up, all you have to do is start ripping off a little piece, just a little chunk. And I want you to work that chunk, okay? Try to make it as soft as you can. You want to make it pliable, right? And as I squeeze it and as I work it, you take a few times bending it back and forth, squeezing it. Once you feel that it's softened up, I want you to kind of squeeze it and flatten it, kind of like a little pancake. It's a little flat. And we're just going to drop this on our workspace. We're done with that little chunk, and we're going to go get another chunk and work that. And we're just going to do this until we get about halfway to 3/4 of the way through the ball. You don't have to break it all apart right now. You don't have to work it all right now, especially if you don't know if you're going to use it. So we're going to do this for a few minutes, and we'll come back to each other once we've softened our clay. As you're massaging this clay, you're working through this clay, really try to stay focused on the emotion that you were thinking about, the emotion you chose. As you squeeze this clay, try to push the emotion into this clay. Okay, so I've made it over halfway of the way through my clay ball. I have all of these flat little pancake-like pieces ready to go. Now I'm going to make some space for myself. Maybe you need to move some of these little pancakes out of the way to give yourself a little area. So I'm going to just move these over for now. Okay, I have a nice little area right here that I can use. The final thing that should have been in your clay kit is this foil. Now this foil is pretty big. It's pretty long. We're going to open it up. Mine is a little shorter, but you should all have a longer piece. Now, we're going to bake these sculptures. So, if you don't have any aluminum foil, check with an adult to make sure you have some. If you don't have any foil at all, I need you right now to cut a small little piece of foil, one big enough to hold the sculpture that you're going to make, okay? That's really important. This square is going to be how big your sculpture can be. Your sculpture cannot be bigger than this square, however big you cut your square, okay? So I have cut my foil. We're going to save this. When we go to bake our sculpture, we need a piece of aluminum foil to bake on. So if you do not have aluminum foil, please save a piece this size, put it to the side. Now the rest of the foil is ours. So earlier I mentioned that if you had extra popsicle sticks, you could use this as the skeleton for your creature. I'm sure that sounded really weird, but I'm here to explain it. So the first thing we're going to do is rip off another little piece of foil. If you do not have a popsicle stick, if you do not have an extra popsicle stick, or you don't want to use it, what you're going to do is you're going to grab this foil and you're going to crumple it up. So we're all thinking about that feeling, right? The creature that we're creating. We're trying to put together out of foil kind of like the skeleton, right? The bones of this creature. What does this creature look like? Do you have a blob like the one I drew? If so, the skeleton of a blob probably looks like a circle. If you have something really long or tall, or it's like a person maybe, then obviously you need to make a thinner kind of skeleton. And the way that I like to do it is I like to go little bit by little bit. I cut pieces of foil, I crumple it around my shape, focusing on making a skeleton that I'm happy with. So I'm starting to extend my skeleton using that foil. Now let's keep going. Let's keep doing that. Now, if you were curious about how to use a popsicle stick as your skeleton base, all it requires is that you crumple aluminum foil around the stick. Make sure you're really sealing it around, and you just do that all the way up and down this whole thing until you like how thick it is and you like the shape of it. Maybe you want to add little things to it. So let's say you have more aluminum foil at home and you want to make a more interesting shape. Feel free to use that from your own personal stash. It is absolutely okay if you only have this foil. We can always make something interesting. So I'm going to grab some more foil since I started with a shorter sheet. And this would be the skeleton base with the popsicle stick. So if this is something that you want to use, go for it. I am going to continue working on this shape because I kind of like how it's starting to look like a little moon or an empanada. I don't know. As you start adding layers of aluminum foil, you will find that you can turn it into cool shapes, kind of like this now. It's become a little slug looking shape. I'm really into how that's turning out, so I'm going to keep adding structures to it. When you want to join a piece of foil as a structure, I always recommend twisting or compressing the part that you want to look like the projection. So I want another little tentacle. And I always recommend leaving out a flat piece of foil that you can use to wrap around your main structure, just so that it's a little secure. You will be able to add things to the sculpture after we've added some clay to the foil. But it's nice to get it done if we can while we're working with the skeleton. Again, go at your own pace. Feel free to pause this video if you need more time working on it. This class, you know, you usually want to take about an hour working on it. I like to tell everyone that just when you think you're finished, you're not. There's more that we can do. But what truly matters is that you are satisfied with the thing that you are creating. So this is what I have so far. It's kind of interesting. It's a little creepy looking. I like it though. So take a few minutes to continue to work on your skeleton. Be conscientious about size. That just means pay attention to how big you're making it. You want to make sure that it can still sit completely on that piece of foil that you cut out earlier for a little tray. You also want to make sure that you have enough clay to cover it. So take a few minutes to do that, and then let's meet up when we're ready to apply the clay. So at this point, you should be done with your skeleton. You want to make sure that the foil is pressed as tightly as it can be against each other. You don't want any kind of air pockets. So now we're going to go to those little pancakes that we made earlier, those flat pieces of clay. And we're going to start laying this out over our skeleton. If the aluminum foil were the bones, then this is like the skin or the fur or whatever we're putting over our creature. The clothes even, it can be anything. And what we're doing is we're using our finger to push the clay into the foil to make it stick. And we're pushing it really hard. And we can use the pads of our fingers to kind of slide it down on the clay to really smoothen it out and press it into the foil. We want to try to keep an even coverage around the whole thing, and we want to try to cover all of the foil. You shouldn't be able to see the aluminum foil coming through the clay. You want it to be pretty well covered. The reason why we squish our clay is because it's really important to have these flat little pads because we can tell kind of how thick they are. And when it's time to start baking, we really need to know how thick our clay is, or at least be able to kind of guess. If you have this kind of stick, or maybe you have a popsicle stick, you can use it to kind of press down the little pats of clay and smooth it into the next piece. If maybe there's like a little area that it's hard to get your finger into, it's a really good tool to just press it down. And so let's just keep going around our foil. Let's get everything covered as much as possible. Again, feel free to pause this video until you get to a point where you like how covered your foil structure is. That means that I shouldn't see any foil, you shouldn't see any foil, and all the clay should be pressed down tightly against the foil. It's really important to squish the clay into each other and make sure that it's sticking. As you add clay to your structure, you might notice that there might be like bumpy parts or maybe like little lines, seams that you see between your pieces of clay. If you just use the pad of your finger and slowly glide it across, you can smooth out that clay. It's easier, in my opinion, to smooth it out as you put it on instead of trying to cover the whole thing with clay and then coming back to smoothen it out. You'll also notice that this clay is getting a lot softer the more we work it because the heat from our bodies is softening it up. So that's kind of nice. Okay, so I'm working my way through it. You should be able to see that it's slowly getting all the way covered. I don't know if it's very clear. Yeah, so you see that I'm covering it all the way up. I've gotten this far and I've decided that I actually want another spiky lumpy piece on it. So I'm going to grab some of this foil that I used earlier for the stick, since I'm not going to make it out of that stick. And I'm going to grab a piece of foil. I'm going to cut it so it's a little bit smaller. And I'm going to make that little shape that I want. It's a little hard to squeeze sometimes. Okay. And now I'm just going to shove it into the clay. It has to be shoved into a part with clay on it, obviously, to stick. Now, whenever I do something like this, right, where I've added foil onto the clay to give an extra layer of dimension or maybe a projection outside of the shape, you know, I'm giving it something else that's sticking out of it. I like to grab a piece of clay and I like to roll it, kind of like when you play with Play-Doh and you make those long snakes. A tried and true method. So if you were attaching this, like if it was paper or something, you need to glue it. It's clay, we can't glue it, but the great thing about clay is that it kind of works as its own glue. So after you get a strip that you've made a little snake, I like to wrap it around the base of the new piece of foil I added. And it's also, this is where these little popsicle sticks come in handy to really press it into the base of it and into the base of the clay that's already under it. And this is going to serve as a kind of glue, basically. It's going to really help secure that new structure. And you can do this a few times until you feel like it's pretty on there. It's pretty secure. It's not going anywhere. I like how that feels. I'm feeling pretty confident of how secure that is on. So I'm just going to keep working around and cover everything with foil. And I have one more tip before we take a few minutes to continue working. However long you need, it doesn't have to be a few minutes. You can come back to me in an hour, whatever you need. But before we get to that point, I want to point out now, let's go to these tools that we haven't used yet, right? The toothpick and the little spear that's pokey. We should have some flat pieces left over, right? Some flat little pancakes left over. I want you to put that down on your workspace and I want you to flatten it, kind of smooth out any seams that you see. I'm going to do that real fast and I'm going to make sure that it's like as flat as I can get it because I kind of want a thinner thing, right? So what we're doing is we're going to use our toothpick or the little spear to cut out a shape. So you remember that I told you, and you kind of have to put your finger on the clay as you cut it to keep it from warping. And so I've cut a little petal. I'm thinking I'm going to give this creature some scales. So it's not super perfect, but the point is to get a little piece of clay cut out, flattened it, and using it as a kind of texture. And so I'll show you my little petal right now. I don't know if you can see that. It's so tiny, it's so slight, very delicate. Right? And I'm just going to use that to kind of lay it over my creature as a structure. And actually I just noticed that this rolled and I really like that. So now I've made like a little tiny swirl. I don't know if you can see that. Yeah, and I'm just gonna make a bunch of these and stick it over my sculpture. So see you in a sec. Use this trick to get all of these tiny little detail things out. It's so fun to add texture to it. Think of what your feeling would feel like. Would it be soft? Would it be fuzzy? Maybe you're interested in using this tool to make a lot of little holes. Maybe it has like a lot of freaking freckles or something. Do you see that? I know it's a little hard to see, but you can see right there that I've put some holes in it. You can use this as texture. You can also swipe it across the clay to give a kind of furry feeling. I don't know if you can see that. Oh, there we go. Right there. You see that little fur? That's what we're looking for. So feel free to play around, get some different textures in there. Let me see some features, something to help me guess, because I do have to guess what feeling you created. So try to help me out. Give me a few tips. Not too many. Okay, I'll see you in a second when we're done. So at this point, you should be done with your sculpture. All this means is that you've gotten to a place with it where you like it, you're happy with it, you don't feel that there's anything else you could possibly do to it to better communicate the feeling that you chose. I'm going to show you a few of the different textures that I did on my sculpture. These are just examples of things you can do with your own sculpture. Maybe if you take another look at it and you decide, hey, maybe I could add some more stuff, feel free to do it. So let's get up close to the camera. So on mine, I added a few different elements. These are just ideas, just suggestions. Right here you can see I put a few thorns. If you look at them, they're a little spiky on the side. I also came over to this side and just flattened little circles on them. You see them like little pads? There we go, we can see a little bit of them in the shadow. And they're just like little tentacle pads, little bumps. And then I also added these really fun, let's see, I know my hand kind of helps with it a little bit. These little swirly designs, you guys see it? So these are really like little tentacles wrapped up on themselves like little hairs. And of course, it's all up to you. I wonder if you guys will be able to guess what emotion I am making. So once you're done, you feel that you're completely done with the sculpture, it's time to bake. You need an adult in order to bake, and you need an adult's permission in order to bake. Before you do anything, you need to make sure that you have something to put on the bottom of your sculpture. That's why we cut out that piece of aluminum earlier. We're gonna put our sculpture onto it. And sometimes just to add a little structure, you might want to bend the edges of the foil that you cut out. Make it like a little dish. And so you can either put this directly on the rack if you have a sculpture that's strong enough to do that, or you can put the foil on a baker sheet, ask your parent or your caretaker if that's something that you have around the house. In order to bake this, I need the adult in your life to pay attention to what I'm about to say. So take a second to go get that adult, make sure that they're right next to you and that they're listening and taking some notes. Okay, so to all the adults, we have been working with Original Sculpey today. It's very important because it changes the time that we take to bake it. Now, according to the instructions, you want to preheat your oven to 275 degrees Fahrenheit. It's 275 degrees Fahrenheit. We're going to preheat it. We're going to get it to just the right temperature. Now, I hope that maybe you were able to pay attention while your student was making this sculpture, because Sculpey requires you to bake it based on how thick the amount of clay you used is. I did a pretty thin, even layer around my foil. I would say it's nowhere is it thicker than 1/2 inch. But then I did make these tentacles and they don't have a lot of foil under them, so those are thicker. So I'm gonna go with the thickest point of clay, the thickest pure point of clay. So that doesn't mean the clay that we put around the foil body, but like the loose pieces of clay that are super thick. We go to that, figure out approximately how thick it is, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, 3/4 inch, an inch of clay. They shouldn't have enough to make an inch. And what you're going to do is you're going to bake it for 15 minutes per 1/4 inch. So if you have a layer of clay around your sculpture that is 1/2 inch thick, that means you need to bake it for 30 minutes at 275 degrees Fahrenheit, okay? Keep an eye on it. It shouldn't get brown. It shouldn't get toasty. Once the timer comes up, there's no way to check until this has cooled down. So you want to pull this out of the oven. It will still be soft, so be really careful to not let it bump into anything or get any kind of markings that you wouldn't like on it. Once you pull it out, let it cool completely. I recommend giving it 30 minutes to an hour on your countertop. It shouldn't take that long, but better safe than sorry. At that point, your sculpture is done, and I cannot wait to see it on Wednesday. I am so excited, or the next day that we have a class together. I'm so excited to see everyone's work, and I'm so thankful that you took the time out of your day to do this class with me. See you next time.